subcommittee will come to order. We were hearing from our corporate witnesses, and Mr. Schiff was concluding his questions, and it wasn't clear that he had finished his
I have just a little bit more, if I may continue.
Please continue, sir.
I thank the Chair. Let me turn to the General Dynamics representatives and repeat the question. We all apologize for that interruption, but we had to vote, as you know. I know there's a dispute, it's been amply stated, as to the reasons for the cancellation of the A-12 contract, and that dispute will have to be resolved at some point. But my question is, from General Dynamics' point of view, how can we all make the most of what everyone agrees is a bad situation? How does General Dynamics feel that we can take whatever assets were produced from the investment that was made in the A-12 contract and use them for the benefit of the national mission, which still remains?
I find your question very challenging, sir. Again, I will try to be responsive, but I have to caution that I'm not used to dealing with matters of that sort of scope. Let me first at least try to make a point that the contract did result in much useful and usable information. The difficulty, of course, is whether that will apply to a next-generation aircraft. To make the most use of what occurred would mean that you would need a follow-on to that program. And that would certainly, from my point of view, as a citizen, make some sense. It is a tragedy that so much human effort has been brought to an unexpected end and basically is in pieces. There was a great deal of work done, much meaningful work. I read recently a report on the termination at our company that there were some 21,000 parts that were inventoried for purposes of establishing where it was that we were at the completion of the contract or at the termination of the contract, and that their weight was in excess of 2 million pounds. And I was struck by that amount of material that had been generated. We really were in the process of starting to produce the aircraft at the time of the termination. I think it might be instructive, helpful to the country if the committee were to pursue that. I'm somewhat at a loss to give a more definitive answer, recognizing that to pick up the program and move it forward from where it was terminated is difficult, and to use the pieces that are left over requires study and would require an understanding of where the Navy now wants to go with the new aircraft.
In the opinion of both of the contractors, if it were the Chairman's decision to do so, how could this subcommittee try to determine how much of the A-12 inventory that was put together on the A-12 contract remains useful in future in trying to put together a new solution to the Navy mission? What should we do? What can we do to try to make that evaluation to either representative?
So, sir, I would say that certainly the Department of Defense has a very key role to play in that decision. We delivered a tremendous amount of information, technical information, information on software, on design, from an engineering standpoint. All that is of significant use if it's the intent of the government to build an advanced aircraft with stealth capability. That information should not go to waste. And certainly maybe through this process a vehicle will arise where you're able to coordinate and deal with that through the Department of Defense. They really are conduit.
Any addition on that from General Dynamics?
No, sir. The question you pose is really a very technical question as to how to, given the status at the time of termination, how to best exploit that information and those documents. I'd have to also caution that what has occurred is not only the development of a large body of data, but what has also occurred has been the development within the minds of our engineers, both McDonnell Douglas, General Dynamics, and the subcontractors to each of us, regarding the problems that were posed by the A-12 contract and the technology that was to be developed there. And those people, by and large, sir, are gone.
One last question. The Navy's talking about basically starting from scratch in a new contract because they still wish a more advanced aircraft from the present A-6. Has the Navy sent out any specifications or otherwise given an indication of what its requirements are in the new contract to indicate whether what was invested in the A-12 would in fact be useful to apply to the new contract? Can that question be answered at the present time?
From McDonnell Douglas's standpoint, I'm sorry, I cannot. I know they've asked us for interest in bidding on a new requirement, new aircraft.
Any specifications yet for what to bid on?
They may have discussed that with us, Congressman, but I'm not aware of that.
All right.
The best answer I can give, sir, is that I have heard discussions of what people believed would be in the document or was in a document they had seen, but I have not personally seen it. I'm not aware of it. The Admiral's statement about the synopsis and request for expressions of interest is probably factually the status that we have.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank the Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Mr. Chris Shays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for being here, and thank you for tolerating the delay and also these long hearings. May I just first get some housekeeping out of the way, and it should, I don't want to dwell a long time on this, but I would like to just have a perspective. In 1990, what were your overall gross sales of each of your companies? What was the gross sales?
For McDonnell Douglas, it was approximately $16 billion. I have the exact figures if
That's
you like.
fine. Approximate is fine.
Approximately $16 billion.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
advised it was around 10.3, sir.
Okay. And what did you declare as revenue profit?
McDonnell Douglas's profit was slightly over $300 million of net income.
Okay.
I think we reported a loss in excess of $500 million, sir.
Okay. And the final question in that regard, did you pay dividends in that year?
Yes, sir, we did.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Even with a loss, you still paid dividends?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When I want to just to verify whether you agree with some of the information that I have, that, and I'll just run through it. The Secretary of Defense, following completion of the MAR report to the Committee on Armed Services, reported to the Committee on Armed Services that the A-12 program was healthy, that the day before the Navy Captain Lawrence Elberfeld, program manager for the A-12, briefed Vice Admiral Richard Gentz, the commander of the Navy Air Systems, that the program was in trouble, and that on June 1st, the contractors advised the Navy that they would, on May 31st, the Navy exercised Lot 1 option of the FSD contract for 6 aircraft at a fixed price of $1.2 billion, and then finally on June 1st, the contractors advised the Navy that there would be a slip in the schedule for the first flight. Are those pretty much the way you remember at least those events? Gentlemen, each of you?
I remember the last two, the earlier ones I do not. I was not cleared on the program at that point in time, and I'm not knowledgeable.
Yes, sir.
I have no personal knowledge of those dates or events, sir. They are consistent with my...
But let's just take the last two events. Basically, the Navy was expecting 6 planes for $1.2 billion. Is that not, is that accurate?
I believe that's accurate.
Yeah. And you advised the Navy that you couldn't perform according to the contract. Is that correct?
I don't ever remember McDonnell Douglas advising the Navy that it couldn't perform on the contract.
Did you advise the Navy and the Defense Department that you could not provide those 6 aircraft at the fixed price of $1.2 billion?
I don't recall the discussions that were had. That's something I could.
Let me just cut through it then, sir. What's your
Congressman.
answer, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
I was not present for any such meetings, and I cannot tell you, sir, what was said.
Well, is it not true that the Navy, that you all were supposed to provide 6 aircraft for $1.2 billion?
I believe that's right.
And
Yes,
when
sir.
was the date that that was supposed to be provided?
Again, I don't have those program details.
Well,
I remember the 6 airplanes. I remember $1.2 billion, but I'm not aware of the specifics
Well,
on the program.
Was it supposed to be due at the Navy? When you do not know when those 6 airplanes were due to the Navy? I mean, that's your testimony to this committee?
My testimony to you is that I'm not on the program. Our program people would have that knowledge. The chief financial
Well,
officer of
let
the
me just say
company would
this.
not.
Let me just. When you do not know when those 6 airplanes were due to the Navy? I mean, that's your testimony to this committee?
My testimony to you is that I'm not on the program. Our program people would have that knowledge. The chief financial
Well,
officer of the
let me just say
company would
this.
not.
Let me just say this to you. You are coming here representing your company, and I at least have to have some confidence that you know when you were supposed to produce these aircraft. And if you want to give it within 3 or 4 months, fine. But when was your understanding that these planes were supposed to be produced?
Well, since I'm testifying under oath, I would rather find out the facts and respond to you instead of trying to guess what the answer is.
Did you believe that they had to be produced in 1990?
Again, sir, I can't answer that question without reviewing the facts.
Sir?
Sir, I would have to have the contract and examine the contract to see what it says.
I find both your answers absurd. I would think even the men and women working your plant know that you were supposed to produce 6 planes at some date, and the fact you don't know when you were supposed to produce those planes, I find mind-boggling. Is that your testimony? You don't know when you were under oath, gentlemen, you don't know when you were supposed to produce those planes. Is that your statement to us, under oath?
Congressman, under oath, I've just said to you that I'm not on the program.
That's not what I
I
asked.
don't have the detailed information on the program.
That's not what I
But the program
asked.
people do, McDonnell Douglas
That's not what I asked, sir.
knows what those dates are. And if you'd like that information, we
No,
certainly
this is
can
what
get that for
this
you.
is what I want to ask you, under oath. I want to ask you if you knew when the airplane was supposed to be produced, not whether you were part of the program.
Under oath, I would respond to you by saying I may have known that at one time, but I do not recollect that today here. I didn't come prepared to answer questions about when options were to be built on the program.
Sir?
I do not know the delivery date of the aircraft, sir.
Okay. So under oath, I'm assuming that you never saw any documentation that described when these planes were supposed to be delivered.
I'll respond again, Congressman, by saying I don't recall today. Those are facts I may have had at my disposal at one point in time, but that's been quite some time. That's been almost a year ago.
Let me ask you another question. You described to this committee that that having to pay back the $1.3 billion would be viewed by the banks as a material adverse change. Is that correct?
There were some of our banks who said they would view that as a material adverse change.
Mr. Putnam? How would the banks have viewed it in your circumstance?
I think they would have viewed it as a major adverse development and would certainly have caused them to reconsider both the amount of which they would continue to agree to try to provide loans on and the rate at which they would make such loans.
Now, would it be your testimony, Mr. Lansnes? Is that, I'm saying your name correct?
Lanise, that's...
Lanise,
sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr.
That's all right.
Lanise. Mr. Lanise, is it your statement that the fact that this contract, let me ask you this, how did the banks view the cancellation of the contract? How did they view that based on the fact that it was a cancellation on default? Did that not constitute a material adverse change?
If it was their belief that it really is a contract that was canceled for default, that could have resulted in them assessing that as a material adverse change for the company.
So is it your testimony that banks do not believe that this is a contract that will not ultimately be verified to be cancellation based on default? Are you telling us the banks view it the same way you view it?
The banks have heard the position of McDonnell Douglas, and they know that we feel very strongly that we have a case and a dispute that we feel will vindicate our position. And based on the representations that we've made to them, they at this point in time don't view that as a material adverse change.
Mr. Putnam?
I don't feel I could answer a question as to what the bankers might have thought or do think about our situation, sir. I do not deal with bankers as a rule other than in connection with my own checking account, so I don't feel competent to answer, sir.
You're more than worried about your own checking account. You're here representing your company based on the whole point of deferral, and the justification for deferral of the payment was the reaction of the banks in large measure and cash flow. Now, we're going to get to that in just a second. I would like to know, in each case, how you have recorded the action of the government in terms of a cancellation based on default in terms of your financial documents. Let me be more specific. In terms of McDonnell Douglas, have you written off any of the contract, or have you in fact put in your books that the government owes you money?
From McDonnell Douglas' standpoint, we closed the year in and took a $350 million pre-tax loss related to the A-12 program.
Is it your testimony under oath that in fact then that you have not only in your books, you do not show in any case in your books that you are making additional claims on the government, but you actually have taken of that $1.3 billion, you've written off $300 billion?
What I'm saying is, for financial reporting purposes,
yes, sir.
McDonnell Douglas has taken a write-off of $350 million that's thoroughly explained in our annual report.
Okay. No, what I'm trying to understand, though, is exactly what you're saying, and you understand, I don't, and ultimately I'm the one who has to understand. Let me put it this way. The government has claimed that collectively you, as both contractors, owe about $1.3 billion. It's my understanding, it's your claim that you've spent more than the total amount of $2.6 billion that the government has given you. Is this correct?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Have you written off the amount that you have spent in addition to the 2.6, or have you written off some of the 1.3 that the federal government is claiming?
Okay, Congressman, the two aren't related. For financial reporting purposes, there's very defined rules that we follow. And those rules required us to, one, get an estimate of what the overrun would have been had the program continued. Number two, to take a percentage of that based on our current position on that program, namely how far complete the program was. Number three, we reflected in our financial condition some minimal realizable value based on the claims that we would be submitting to the government for relief. Out of those three numbers, out of those three calculations, falls out the $350 million loss I talked about earlier. I'm sorry, it's not as simple as looking at what cash is owed to whom. There's very specific accounting rules that we follow to reach that. And by the way, it's unrelated to what we believe the ultimate recovery will be for McDonnell Douglas, only because the accounting rules require that you be much more conservative than what you may believe future recovery to be, and we've tried to be so.
Well, frankly, it doesn't describe to me that you've been very conservative at all. You are making an assumption you're going to get this money. That's the way I view it. Mr. Putnam, have you dealt with this issue the same way, or have you dealt with it differently?
We've dealt with it somewhat differently. The amounts of write-offs, I think, in our case are larger, closer to $700 million that we have recorded as write-offs against the contract.
This is the crux of my interest. Both McDonnell Douglas Corporation, General Dynamics, on February 5th, 1991, requested a deferment after the project was canceled based on default. And it's a one-page document which has already been discussed today. It's in regards to the A-12 contract. And you said, in accordance with the FAR 32.613, this will constitute a request by the contractor team for deferment of repayment. The basis for the request is A, immediate payment of the amount demanded is not practical, and B, the amount is dispute. Was there any accompanied documents to this letter given to the government? Was this pretty much a letter without an enclosure? I don't see enclosure stated on
From
it.
McDonnell Douglas's standpoint, there was significant amount of data that was transferred
That's not what I
prior to
asked.
that document.
Okay.
There was
That's not what I
nothing
asked.
attached to that document.
Okay. The answer to the question is there was nothing attached to this
There
document.
was nothing attached to that
Okay,
document
and
that
this
I'm
is
aware of.
This is the formal request, is that correct? Is that your understanding, Mr. Putnam?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Now, I want to know specifically what you gave the government to back up that, and I want to know where in this letter you referred to those documents.
Okay, if I can speak for McDonnell Douglas, please.
Yes.
Congressman, I think it's important to understand that we had been working with the Department of Defense for an extended period of time prior to February 5th. McDonnell Douglas's cash flow has been tight throughout 1990. Working closely with them, by that I mean we have supplied to the government over a number of months key information regarding McDonnell Douglas's financial condition. So when February 5th came around, the government was by no means unaware of where we stood.
Mr. Neese, that's such a general response, though. I mean, we are talking about $1.3 billion, and basically what the government has done is it extended you a loan.
That's not true.
Basically, that's what they have done.
No, that's not true at all.
No, they have given you money.
They haven't given us anything,
No, sir,
Congressman.
you're interrupting me. You can finish. They have extended you money beyond what the government believes you performed. I realize that's in dispute. And that's clear. You've made it clear that you're disputing that amount. But you now have, collectively, as far as the government is concerned, $1.3 billion at 8-something interest rate, not compounded, it's simple interest rate. And there's no way you could get a money like that at that interest rate that I know of. Now, what's your response to that, sir?
Well, my response to that is that it's not a loan. For you to assume it is a loan, you have to base it on the fact that this contract is, in fact, a cancellation for default.
Yeah.
And we don't believe the facts will support that.
Okay. Mr. Putnam?
We would agree with Mr.
Okay.
Lanise.
Now,
The matters.
yes, I'm sorry.
We would agree with Mr. Lanise.
Now, what you have told me is that this was a one-page letter that asks for deferment, and you say that you provided information about cash flow. I want to know more specifically, sir, what you provided in the sense that is there any one document or two document, was it verbal, was it in writing, there was reference to 10 to 20 pages by you, there was reference to a stack of papers by the government. I want to know what we need to find to see this justification. And I don't want it to be an oral one. I want to know what was in writing.
Okay, may I clarify something first? The 10 to 20 pages represented the initial information that we submitted to the Department of Defense in support of our request for deferment.
Okay, now let me just ask you this. When was that submitted to the department, and what's the title of that document?
I'm not sure of the title, but it was marked, it was a McDonnell Douglas financial review. It was marked McDonnell Douglas sensitive and proprietary. It was sometime in early January, I would say mid-January probably. Counsel on my right says the 16th of January. Congressman, from that, there was a tremendous amount of discussion because as I'm sure...
Can I just interrupt you a second, sir, and I'll let you answer. In that document, did you at that time ask for a deferral?
We told the Department of Defense after the cancellation of the program on January 7th that we would be coming back with a request for deferral.
Verbal?
We did that verbally.
Yeah.
We did that verbally.
Okay.
And shall I go on?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. After submitting the initial pieces of paper, we went through a lot of discussion explaining what the papers mean. Some of that information was public documents, documents that you can find today in the annual report that we've submitted to the committee here. Some of the information, however, was very proprietary to McDonnell Douglas. I would say that if I were to summarize the kind of information that it was, it's the same information that we give our lenders. It's the same internal information that we use with our banks. Once that information was passed out, initially there was a lot of discussion and a lot of follow-up that took place. I'm not aware of how much more paper was generated. The parts that I'm sensitive to are the parts related to McDonnell Douglas's competitive situation, its forecasts, the kind of information we passed on of things that we would be doing that, if exposed, would compromise those actions, those future actions, with either our customers, our suppliers, or our competitors. That information was a part of the overall package. It was certainly not the overall package, though, Congressman.
Congressman, from a General Dynamics standpoint, the letter which says that information had been furnished refers to information furnished on the 16th of January and given to the Navy at that meeting.
16th of January?
16th of January, sir. And
how many pages was that document?
I think I answered earlier that I would estimate it was 20 to 30 pages.
Okay.
I think it would have been identified as information being furnished regarding the potential request for deferment. Again, a demand had not been made at that point, but we certainly anticipated one. So I think we would have identified it that way. It had a cover sheet. The cover sheet did identify it as proprietary information or as containing proprietary information.
Okay, the gentleman, I would make a request to you that you supply those documents, specifically your 10 to 20 page document, your 20 to 30 page document, directly to the committee. And I would also respectfully request that you provide the backup material that you say gives added voice to those materials. Is that something that you can do, sir?
Sir, a fair amount of the backup that took place with the involvement and the work of the Department of Defense. Specifically, one thing I mentioned earlier was once we submitted the data that we did, the DOD requested a DCAA review of that documentation, and they did a very thorough review. The papers that were generated from that process we're not privy to. Those papers went to the Department of Defense.
Well, let's just start then. Do you have any objection in supplying the 10 to 20 page document to this committee?
I have no objection supplying any of the public information that's in that. I do have an objection with supplying information on...
No, let's be specific. You do object to providing that document, is what you're telling me. You would edit it, is that what you're saying?
In its entirety, I do. Yes, sir, I do. And again, the reason why I do is because that document contains projections and future actions that McDonnell Douglas will be taking to improve its position, its financial position, and if disclosed, would compromise us with our customers, our suppliers, and our competitors here in the United States and abroad. And for that reason, it's very sensitive. There's commercial airline information in there that we would be very sensitive to having disclosed.
See, I might just react. It seems to me that the public is entitled to some information, and they certainly were entitled, it seems to me, before June. They were entitled to know that you wouldn't be able to perform the contract. It seems to me that there are some things even the public is entitled to. Mr. Putnam, do you have any objection to providing the 20 to 30 page document?
I would have to ask advice of counsel on that point, sir. The information that we would consider sensitive are forecasts that we do not normally make available because they could aid our competitors, would work to our disadvantage in the international marketplace. Other than that, certainly we would have no objection, and I would have to ask counsel his opinion.
I'll state a comment on that.
Could you talk in the mic, sir?
Right. Generally, Congressman, as I recall the data that was provided on January 16th, I really don't see any problem about producing it to this committee, except for one situation. There are projections in that data, and from an SEC point of view, it would be unfortunate if that somehow leaked out or were disclosed, because our company, like most corporations, does not make public projections. Most of the material that we provided to the Navy, as I recall, is historical, and I just don't have any problem with that. I don't anticipate that I'd have any difficulty with our CFO in talking to him about it. I think the general answer to you is we would make it available. If we had a difficulty about it, we'd address that difficulty.
Would the gentleman yield
Definitely.
to me? I'd like to make it clear to both the corporation representatives and their counsel that we have files full of sensitive, proprietary, and top secret information. This is not a case of first instance where the material is extremely sensitive. We're not depreciating the importance and the value that you place on the information that you provided without anticipating that it might come to this pass. So what I want to try to do is give you as much comfort as I can that your material will be treated with the same sensitivity that we treat all other like information that of necessity in these kinds of oversight problems flow through the committee. What we get down to in the heart of this matter, and Mr. Shays has been probing it as effectively as he can, is what are the materials upon which this deferment was based. And some were public and some were not public. We understand and have been made perfectly clear that these materials would be damaging were they to enter into the public domain. This committee has no record of leaks or information dissemination, and I want to tell you that we want to have you fully check the law on this matter. This is not a case of first instance. And I think that you will quickly realize that as delicate as this position is to you, we would, quite frankly, be violating our obligation to try to pass over this in some kind of way. And I'm trying to speak directly to you about this, but there would be no point in having hearings of this nature if this problem were dealt with in any other way, but that the materials would ultimately repose in the committee and go back to you. And I thank the gentleman for permitting that interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments. And let me just conclude by saying, as a new member of Congress, I find it pretty unbelievable that a request of deferment of 1.3 would be noted in one page with no cross-reference to documents supplied. And I will pursue with all the vigor I have in obtaining the documents that you seem so unwilling to provide us, because ultimately we do need to see those documents. It may in fact substantiate your claims and it may not. We have to know where the screw-ups were, and our job is to do our best to make sure they don't occur in the future. And obviously we've spent $2.6 billion. We have all these parts around, and you have some knowledge base, but the bottom line is we don't have a plane put together, and we're starting, it seems to me, from ground zero. I will just conclude my comments, and I don't usually do this, but I want to give you, gentlemen, one last chance on one issue, and that's how I started off. You both are very distinguished individuals in your company. You're here to testify on the A-12, and you have both said to me that neither of you have any recollection of when you were supposed to produce 6 planes. And that is so hard for me to believe. Obviously, you're under oath, and I have to believe you, but I just have to tell you that of all the hearings I've ever attended, whether it's these hearings or the HUD hearings, I've never found a statement harder for me to accept than that one. And I'm going to once again just ask you if either of you gentlemen knew when you were supposed to produce the 6 planes.
Congressman, we produce hundreds of airplanes a year. I would find it incredible if a senior officer of any corporation producing the kind of airplanes that we produce would know when he's going to produce 6 airplanes.
Is that your answer to me?
Yes, sir, it is.
You're here to testify about a particular project, and I assume this was an important project to you. Let me ask you this. Do you know when you were supposed to produce the first plane?
I know when the first plane was to have flown. Yes, sir,
Yes.
I do.
When was that?
We're supposed to have flown in June.
June of what?
Excuse me. Is that information unclassified? I'm not sure if the information's unclassified on that, Congressman. I'm sorry.
I can, if the gentleman will yield, It's not only not classified, but it's been discussed here this morning,
Okay.
not to mention yesterday at the Armed Services Committee hearing, probably in the newspaper as well.
The date has moved quite a bit, but it was my understanding it was first to fly in June of 1991. That was my understanding.
As the alternate, a deferred date, or is that the time it was originally supposed to fly? You know, feel free to ask one of your other gentlemen who's, is there someone in your company that can tell me what the company knows?
It was June of 1990.
June of
Apologize, not 91.
Yeah, June of 1990. Sir, Mr. Putnam, did you know when the 6 were to fly?
No, sir, I did not. The
Did you know
contract
when the
was
first was to
classified. I have never laid eyes on the contract, sir.
Okay. But basically, in June of 1990, your first plane was not only to have been built, but to have flown. And you told the Navy then that you couldn't produce the contract. Is that to meet the...
Sir, we never told the Navy that we couldn't produce the contract. I'm sorry, I've never heard
In other
that.
words, you never told the Navy that you wouldn't be able to get that plane flying on schedule?
We never told the Navy we couldn't build the airplane.
That's not what I asked. Obviously, someday you can build the airplane. Didn't you tell the Navy you wouldn't be able to meet the schedule?
That the schedule on the airplane slipped, that's correct.
Okay. What's correct?
That the schedule on the airplane slipped.
And you would not be able to meet that deadline, correct?
Pardon me?
And when did you tell the Navy that?
Sometime prior to the first flight.
No. It seems to me that you told them about the day before that you wouldn't be able to. When did you tell them?
Congressman, I don't know who was told and when they were told.
Okay.
Those are certainly facts. If you like those facts, I could find out what those facts are.
No, I guess I'll conclude, Mr. Chairman. I just would just say to you that what I find interesting is that basically there was an assumption on the part of the government, on the part of the public, that you were right on track. And then when it became known, and it became known to the embarrassment of the Secretary after he made a statement you were right on track a few days later, then we have record that you tell the Navy practically very shortly before it was to fly that you hadn't even put the plane together. The whole thing is beyond absurdity to me, and we're going to pursue it until the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we thank you for your testimony, counsel's presence, and helpfulness. As we conclude this hearing, let me just point out that it is clear that the Department of Defense, from my point of view, has bailed out the two largest defense contractors. But what isn't clear is the basis for that decision. We've heard nothing here today that can answer for the documents that have not been forthcoming. And it's not clear yet that the government has learned the lessons identified in the Navy's own official report, the Beach Report, which clearly states that the failures in the A-12 program resulted, quote, from a plain lack of objectivity at the contractor team level and wholly inadequate oversight by General Dynamics and McDonnell Douglas corporate management. At another point, the report states that the contractor requests for progress payments were not properly reviewed to assess their validity, and required analysis supporting critical estimates used to determine contract physical progress were not performed. The report concludes that the failure of the military managers to comprehend and pass bad news up the civilian chain of command represents an abiding cultural problem for which it can be anticipated to occur again in the same or similar form. Now, we here are concerned that the cultural problem has not been cured and that the problem is occurring again in the deferral agreement. As a matter of fact, other defense contractors are now rising up to take advantage of this new situation. We intend to vigorously pursue the possession of the documents now held by yourselves and the Department of Defense bearing on the deferral decision. And as you've heard with our agreement between Defense Department Counsel that we will we will pursue and resolve this matter rather early on. If it's not resolved by Monday, then we will proceed with the process that will enable us to secure possession of the documents. And I'm convinced that the Department of Defense understands this commitment that the members of this committee and myself have, and that the oversight function of this committee cannot be obstructed, particularly in a matter that regards billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. Neither you nor the Department of Defense has any monopoly on proprietary or sensitive information. So I will expect your fullest cooperation in this matter and appreciate your presence here today. Thank you very much. Subcommittee stands adjourned.
For more information about this hearing, you may contact the House Government Operations Subcommittee on Legislation and National Security at B373 Rayburn Office Building in Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20515. Coming up shortly, remarks by Mexico's President Salinas.
Saturday, political change in the Soviet Union will be the topic of a speech by former Senator Gary Hart to students at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Senator Hart, a Democrat,